Mountain ranges with snow-dusted peaks cool their feet in the clear blue sea. Greece boasts 13,000 kilometers of shoreline. Welcome to Hellas. Welcome aboard a journey of discovery to the sites of classical Greek mythology, the roots of Occidental history, the birthplace of Western culture. Welcome home. This part of the series takes us to the south coast, from Rio to Messolonghi, along the Gulf of Corinth, past Naupaktos to Delphi, via Thermopylae to Cape Sounion on the Aegean coast, all the way to Athens. We swing down to Piraeus to end the journey in the Saronic Gulf. In this episode, we meet Philip, who takes us onto the pylons of the world's second largest suspension bridge. He's responsible for health and safety here in the event of an earthquake. In the lagoons of Messolonghi, we meet up with Stylianos. He shows us how afkotaracho, Greek caviar, is conserved. In Delphi, we meet Angeliki, a geologist trying to crack the case of the ancient oracle. In the forests of Attica, 82-year-old Evangelos taps the liquid gold of the trees, the key ingredient of the unique Greek Retsina wine. Graffiti artist Loaf takes us on a tour of his studio, the streets of the Plaka below the Acropolis. Andreas works as a caricaturist at the Athens newspaper Kathimerini. His main subject is democracy in ancient times and today. Olympic gold medal winner Zofia trains in the Saronic Gulf. She pushes herself to the limit and philosophizes about naftosini, the special knowledge Greeks have of the sea. At the outer edge of the Greek mainland, where continental drift once cut a wedge between the Peloponnese and the mainland, a bridge spans the 2-kilometer-wide Gulf of Corinth. Rio Bridge, the bridge of a century. Philip Corbett and his crew work here. Their job? Ensuring that the bridge remains safe. No more, no less. They regularly examine the roadway and the massive tension cables for material fatigue. The bridge is, after all, located in an active earthquake zone. The interiors of the mighty bridge piers are likewise submitted to regular inspection, which means 600 steps down. Philip Corbett is an Englishman who grew up in France. He came to Greece 15 years ago when the enormous bridge piers were erected. Since then, he's spent his days atop the structure and in the belly of the beast. On this day, the team was checking the condition of the concrete because this material too ages, especially here deep below the surface of the water. We'll now carry out an elevated inspection. This elevated platform allows us to inspect one section of concrete about 3 meters long at a time. When we get to the top of a row, we descend, readjust the platform, and start moving up the next bit. We do these inspections about every 4 years. That allows us to keep tabs on the concrete to make sure there aren't any anomalies. Of course, we find other little things as we go. All of this information is entered into a computer and used later to make an inspection report, which we then use to plan the maintenance work in the year to come. In this area, the ocean floor consists of sand, clay, and loose sediment. No solid ground or rock on which the mighty bridge piers could have been solidly anchored. So the gigantic construction swims, so to speak, on the seabed. It rests on a leveled layer of gravel engineered to keep the bridge from collapsing in an earthquake. It's a colossal construction. We have great confidence in it, but we have to be vigilant with inspections. So no, we're not afraid. The roadway is held in place by huge stay cables. They're attached to large shock absorbers designed to dampen uncontrolled vibrations. In the event of an earthquake, there's a system beneath the deck itself connecting the deck to the pier, a safeguard. How does it work? During a storm or an earthquake, it blocks the deck crosswise, and the deck remains blocked by this connection that fuses the deck to the pier. Should this connection be broken, the shock absorbers beneath then dampen the movement between deck and pier. For me personally, it's a daily challenge, because our team is like a family, a sort of family of technicians and engineers that looks after the bridge every day. So it's not only a technical, but a human challenge as well. Technical because there are so many particularities, the earthquakes, the strong winds, so we need direct access to the technology. We have to be very close to our construction. It's a human relations challenge too, because of all the different languages spoken. We work with specialist teams from France, Germany, and Greece. You have to coordinate all of that every single day. The concrete check was finished. Now it's time to climb 350 steps back up to the water surface, and then another 250 up to the road. Philip Corbett has done the job since 1999, and like many of his colleagues, has become very fond of the bridge. No wonder. It's his baby to a certain extent. I think she's many people's baby. There were more than 900 of us on site during construction, and everyone saw her as their baby. Personally, I do feel extremely close to the project, but I believe many others do too. I've been on board in effect for 15 years, since the start of construction. Yes, it's true, I'm very attached, but I think that everyone who's done anything on the project has become very attached. It's something you really bond with. Full of pride for his bridge, Philip climbs on ahead, up countless ladders to the top of the bridge pier, 164 meters above the water surface. Every time I come up here, it always makes quite an impression. Today, with such super weather conditions, it's really beautiful, great visibility. It's very calm now, so there's not much apparent movement. But it really is a living structure, in general because there's tension in the stay cables, running from one side to the other. You can feel the movement, especially when it's very windy. It's a living structure, like I said, despite its stability and the feeling of security it gives. It's alive. The Rio Bridge was built to last 120 years, the engineers promise. And if Philip and his team keep up their regular inspections and swift repairs, it should hold up much longer than that. In which case, Philip's great-great-grandchildren might also use the bridge to get from the Peloponnese to the Greek mainland. To visit the lagoons near Messolonghi, for example, only a few kilometers away to the west. The waters of the lagoons are full of fish. No wonder the flamingos like it here so much. Long dikes border large pools. Many fish willingly leave the open sea to come here and eat their fill. Stylianos Kotsaris, too, lives from the fruits of the lagoons. He makes a rare delicacy from the rose sacks of gray mullets. Avkotarachou, Greek caviar. Every year, the pools of the lagoon, feeding grounds for flamingos as well, attract thousands of gray mullets, Greek kefali. They come here from the open ocean waters to fatten up for their long winter journey to the Black Sea. For Stylianos, who comes from an old fishing family, their arrival marks the beginning of the harvest period. Here in the lagoon, the gray mullet produce their eggs, the roe. Then they leave the lagoon again for the open sea where they spawn and reproduce. If Stylianos hasn't caught them first, that is. We have to be very careful when catching the mullets. We execute a caesarean section and take out the roe without hurting the fish, if at all possible. After that, the production of avkotarachou, the caviar, begins. Stylianos doesn't catch the fish himself anymore. He buys the roe-filled kefali from local fishermen and focuses his attention on his real craft, the extremely painstaking conservation process. The first step is the curing of the roe. It's very important for the quality of the caviar. So we do it so that the roe will keep for a long time. If the caviar remains in the salt 10 minutes too long, it will be oversalted. 10 minutes too little, and it will spoil. So it's a very decisive first step, and it requires a real dab hand. It is also critical for the further processing steps. It takes 2, 4, or 6 hours, depending on how big or fat the roe is. You only know when you hold it in your hand. It's not enough just to set the clock. The one who does it must be experienced and has to appraise it with his fingertips. That's the secret of the production.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
When just the right time has passed, the remains of the salt are carefully washed off before the delicate drying process. And then comes polishing. The little pouch with a dried roe is dipped several times in wax, beeswax of course. This seals it airtight, and thus it is conserved. And then the very rare and expensive delicacies are brought to the shop, where they will keep for a year at least, if they haven't all been bought and consumed long before, which is virtually always the case. Sometimes Stylianos even makes home deliveries. Today he's taking the delicacy home for himself and a lady friend who has prepared everything needed for a refined evening meal. Ouzo, tsipuro whiskey, and warm bread are the best side dishes, always have been. Way back when they cut roe into thin slices, removed the wax, and ate the avkotarachou with an ouzo, tsipuro, or whiskey chaser. And that's the way it still is today. Thin slices are cut and the waxed rind removed. and with it, the thin skin of the rosak. This special Greek caviar can also be served with spaghetti or with salad and crackers. The culinary options are endless. The recommended setting, however, is al fresco at sunset. The next morning we continue on, eastwards along the Gulf of Corinth. The port city of Naupaktos. On a fortified tower on the jetty stands a sculpture of Spain's great man of letters, Miguel de Cervantes, the creator of Don Quixote. How curious. What is a Spanish poet doing up on a plinth in a Greek port? The answer is simple. In 1571, the Spanish Navy conquered the Ottoman war fleet here in the Battle of Lepanto. Cervantes was a soldier at the time and took part in the big and bloody clash of the galleons. The memorial to Cervantes was later erected by the Greeks in thanks for his part in liberating them from Turkish rule. Right nearby is the site of what in the ancient world was considered the navel of the world, the Oracle of Delphi, a hub of international politics. The world's power elite came here from far and wide, sometimes many thousands of kilometers, to receive advice and to learn the portents for founding a colony, for example, or prosecuting a war. Back then, Pythia, high priestess of Apollo, sat here and proclaimed her oracles. These were mainly enigmatic fragments that other priests then interpreted. Based on information supplied in advance, intelligence gathered throughout the Mediterranean region by a network of spies. It is said that the high priestess crouched over a crack in the earth from which mysterious vapors arose. To this day, it is not known conclusively what this referred to. What these emissions from the earth could have been is a question that also interests geologist Angeliki Metsafou. She is well acquainted with the particulars of the place and aims to solve the Delphic conundrum.
There was always a lot of earthquake activity in this area. That's because of the tectonic situation of the region. We still find many fissures in the earth here, which are still in motion. One theory postulates that the Oracle of Delphi was erected atop a rift from which gases escaped, which could put the people in a trance state, and that the Pythia used this for her oracle duties.
Throughout the whole region, Angeliki finds fissures in the rock, through which gaseous vapors once escaped, having made their way up from deep down below. Gaseous, with intoxicating, even hallucinogenic effects.
There are many different theories about what the gases that escaped from within the earth here might have been. It was first thought that it must have mainly been ethylene. This theory is based on the testing of rock samples from the region. Water flowed through the limestone, and afterwards the ethylene was released as a result. But another theory postulates that it could mainly have been methane gas that escaped from the earth. The latest theories, however, operate on the assumption that the gases mainly consisted of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, and that these gases were released by seismic or tectonic activities.
The precise gas the high priestess Pythia used to boost her powers of prophecy remains a matter of debate. It is said that the oracle took a winter break. When snow fell in the mountains, the font of wisdom at Delphi dried up. Further evidence that vapors were needed to generate the oracle's trance state and prophecies. Because winter snow above means springs and streams down below run dry, and it was their water seeping into the earth that forced the deeper gas reserves to the surface. No water, no vapors. Those who came here 2,500 years ago to seek the advice of the oracle brought with them valuable presents and sacrificial offerings, making Delphi one of the richest cities in Europe. This building was needed to store the treasures donated by the Athenians alone. The oracle has long fallen silent, but Delphi still relies on the proceeds of visitors, tourists from around the world who have made it one of the most popular sites in Greece, second only to the Acropolis in Athens. In ancient times, Delphi was also home to the Pythian Games, held every 4 years, 2 years before the Olympic Games. The event in Delphi also featured art and performance competitions. Participants sang and made music in honor of the god Apollo, to whom an animal was also sacrificed by those wishing an audience with the oracle.
It's fascinating, the great need we all have for help and advice when we're facing difficult situations or have to make important decisions. We all have that. It's the same need that moved people back then to seek out the oracle for solace and help. Of course, the priests must have taken advantage of that to a certain extent. But the people had such a deep-seated need within them that it's no wonder so many visited the oracle to get answers.
Maybe it was the deep longing of the people for divine truth that brought such fame to Delphi back then. Or perhaps it was in fact the mysterious vapors from within the earth. At any rate, there's a lot going on down there, especially in this part of Greece. A few kilometers away, there's another famous spot with similar gas reserves, the Thermopylae. Here too, the earth exhales, and its breath smells of sulfur, and the water is warm, about 40 degrees Celsius. On the south coast, the day's journey started in Rio and Messolonghi, continued along the Gulf of Corinth, passing Naupaktos to Delphi and the Thermopylae. From here, we would continue on to the forests of Attica and on to the Aegean Sea, to Cape Sounion. Dense pine forests are typical of Attica. The pines are not only home to singing cicadas, they smell nice as well. Especially in the heat, they exude the pungent scent of sap. These forests are the workplace of Evangelos Mitroyannis. Here, he harvests the liquid gold of the pine trees. From an early age, I always tagged along with my father as he worked, running the trade. And now I ply it myself. I'm 82 years old, and I still climb up and down these hills. No one else does this job anymore. It's just me. Tree resin was once a valuable commodity used in many chemical products, before the petrochemicals industry developed alternatives. In the old days, it was used to make turpentine. The factories that used to produce turpentine no longer do so. It was a huge industry, but now they use synthetic resin to make turpentine. There's no organic turpentine anymore, like back in the day. The factories also used to manufacture the rosin for violin bows, colophony. There was a good deal of production for export. 100 people from here in the village still tapped the pines back then. When the juices rise up in the trunks, Evangelos swears he can hear it. He selects the pine trees that he deems strong enough to withstand tapping and gets to work. According to Evangelos, it does no harm to the trees. No, it's good when the sap comes out. If you leave the pines alone and don't tap them, they often burst after 3-4 years and eventually dry up altogether. It's the same with fruit picking. Fig trees, grapevines, if you don't take the fruit, they're done for. The Greek word for resin is Retsina. Originally, the resin was used in wine production to seal the wooden wine kegs. People soon noticed that the resin residue gave the wine a nice spicy note. This new local wine was simply called Retsina. Evangelos is convinced that resinous wine is indeed healthier, a medicine even. Wine with resin is the best. The more resin, the better. It's a mistake to make wine without resin. But the vintners no longer want to buy resin. We charge €5 a kilo for resin, you see. And they want to cut costs. So now they're making wine without resin. Of course I drink Retsina. I'm just about to have lunch. And whatever it is on the menu, I'll wash it down with 2 glasses of Retsina. Just 2 glasses. Retsina used to be synonymous with Greek white wine, but there are hardly any vintners left who pride themselves on adding resin to their product. On the contrary, they now claim that resin overwhelms important flavor notes. The fruit of their vines is far too precious to be subjected to the stuff. Reportedly, almost no one produces Retsina anymore, although you can still find it, usually a cheap variety, allegedly made mainly for export. But a glass of ice-cold Retsina, sipped on the shores of azure waters, is still many tourists' dream of la dolce vita, Greek style. Cape Sounion, on the deep blue Aegean Sea. Here at the southernmost tip of the Greek mainland stands the Temple of Poseidon, a landmark of Greek mythology. Here is where Aegeus, the mythological king of Athens, awaited the return of his son Theseus, who had gone on the dangerous quest to slay the Minotaur. Theseus has promised that, should he succeed, he would swap the black sails of his ships for white ones. Theseus did conquer the Minotaur, but he forgot to set the white sails. Seeing the ships with black sails approaching, King Aegeus threw himself from the cliffs in despair into the sea that ever since have been called the Aegean. The day's journey had begun on the south coast, moved along the Gulf of Corinth to Delphi, to the forests near Marathon, and back to the coast, all the way to the Cape Sounion. Now we were headed for the Greek capital Athens, then on to Piraeus and the waters off Salamis. Coming from the Saronic Gulf, past the old and now defunct airport, we were on the approach to Athens. A megalopolis of over 4 million inhabitants, the city nevertheless has its quiet corners. After its heyday in ancient times, Athens was for a long time little more than a village. Even 2,000 years ago, the area between Leucavitos Hill and the Acropolis was a tourist destination, even though only a few hundred dwellings stood here in the day. The great era of the Athenians was long past, but the myths of the Greek classical age as the cradle of higher human civilization flowered here all the more. European Philhellenes, or admirers of Greek culture, identified with the classical ideals, and in the 19th century championed the revival of ancient Athenian values by supporting the Greek wars of independence and helping a Bavarian prince to ascend the throne in Athens. He commissioned many new buildings: the University of Athens, the National Library, National Academy, and the Royal Palace. Sections of the old city were razed to make way for these neoclassical edifices. Athens grew swiftly, again becoming a major metropolis. One of the buildings is now familiar to viewers of international news reports, the Palace of King Otto I, now the Greek Parliament building. Here, every Sunday morning, the changing of the guard ceremony is enacted by an elite unit in uniforms that harken back to the fight for independence. Athens is now reputed to be the European capital of graffiti. Murals grace the walls of many a domicile, officially approved or illegally dabbed on, lovingly designed or sprayed on a whim. The aesthetic expression of a worldview or a visual political pamphlet. The center of old Athens is Loaf's beat. He's a graffiti artist, here on his way to the Plaka, the old town district below the Acropolis. I've had my eye on this street for some time now. It was somewhat run down, not somewhat, very run down. I decided to start painting it step by step, gradually turning it into a gallery. And it worked. After just 6 months, it was finished. So I only did it because the street was so run down. I've always liked to draw ever since I was a little boy. Then in secondary school, I met kids who had already started doing graffiti. I liked it a lot. The drawings could really be developed much better outdoors than on paper, out there on the big surfaces. That's the main reason I do it, because I feel free. I'm not restricted to small surfaces. I have big spaces. I can make what I like, where I like. Almost, anyways. The subjects that interest me are taken straight from daily life. Not just my life, but also from the lives of my friends and acquaintances, and the stuff you hear on the street. The clock is there to emphasize time, passing of time, and the fact that we don't make use of time here in Greece. Hearts turn up often in my pictures. It's about love, about life. And eyes, too. An eye on a tree, for example, signifies that the tree is alive. Loaf looks for safe sites for his graffiti. He doesn't want any trouble. No easy feat in a city with so many ancient structures. When I was young, they caught me once or twice. I had to go down to the station. They just wanted to see my papers, nothing else. I've always been lucky in that sense. Friends of mine were beaten up because of the painting. When they were younger, not anymore. I'd never paint on the Acropolis or ancient stone, simply out of respect. These stones have stood there for so many years, and who am I to paint over them? I prefer vacant buildings that need a change anyway. There are so many dilapidated buildings. Athens is full of them. But no, I would never paint on ancient antiquities. It's not good when an artist rides roughshod over other artists. And the ancient relics are all artworks. Graffiti appears in public spaces, is seen by many. The graffiti artist is conflicted. Should he out himself, make contact with his audience, or is it better to remain incognito? Sometimes I meet people who pass by and tell me their opinion. Recently, a woman came by and asked, "What's that? It doesn't look nice at all." Of course, she didn't know that it was my work. But most passers-by, especially here in the lane, like what they see. They take pictures. Some people have even asked if I could paint something for them. People are slowly coming to accept it, the graffiti in Greece, and I think that's good. The population of modern-day Athens has exploded, especially since the post-World War II period, when many came here from the rural regions and the islands in search of work. Though Athens isn't impoverished, it does suffer frequent, widespread shortages, and not just since the crisis. Athens has long been a melting pot. The sprayer's art, graffiti and murals are part of an open discourse. After all, Athens is the city in which the foundations were laid for the modern form of social organization we call democracy. Many of the buildings on the Acropolis originated at a time when the war chest of the Delian League was brought to Athens, where a popular assembly decided what the money would be used for, what would be built with it. Every free citizen had a vote. This excluded women, slaves, and foreign citizens flat out, the roots of democracy indeed. Nowadays, everyone has a vote, but hardly anyone in Athens believes that they really have an influence at all on the politics of their country. For caricaturist Andreas Petroulakis, the subject of democracy is alive and kicking. Okay, Athenian democracy was the first cell of the modern-day system of government in the Western world. But it wasn't the same democracy we have today. Democracy means something that belongs to all citizens. In ancient Greece, democracy did not apply to all citizens. Back then, all citizens didn't have the same rights. But you can't have a democracy when the political rights of citizens are restricted or when slavery is actually permitted. But we do definitely have it in any case. The Western democracy that exists in Europe and the USA may have many negative aspects, but it's still the best form of government that man has ever invented. Andreas Petroulakis works for the newspaper Kathimerini, The Daily, a highly reputable conservative broadsheet. As a caricaturist and journalist, the subject of democracy is his daily bread. In the editorial offices, Petroulakis culls his topics from the front lines of Greek and European politics. That includes what he himself says, draws, and writes. The right to free speech and freedom of the press is a cornerstone of democracy, after all. Andreas Petroulakis had a run-in with the Greek Minister of Defense, incensed over a political cartoon with the caption, "Cockroaches survive every political turnaround," and some far-right politicians even managed to grab a seat in a left-wing coalition government. The cartoonist faced a lawsuit claiming €1 million for defamation. Another confrontation over the boundaries of satire. We've had a culture of satire for decades, and we've earned it. We have a great and rich tradition of satirists and caricaturists. And I believe that the majority of the Greek population has a sense of humor, understands sarcasm, irony, and self-deprecation, the majority at least. Humor isn't a gift that in a democracy is equally distributed to all, but very many Greeks do have a sense of humor. The satire that originated in Greece, mainly with Aristophanes, was a form of satire directed at everyone, including the general public. And yet, we currently have a problem with that. My observation is that satire is now directed primarily at politicians, the political leaders, at celebrities, and that members of the public feel devoid of any responsibility whatsoever, which is not at all the case. We, the people, are of course responsible for what politicians do, because in a real democracy, they can only do what we allow them to, and when they step out of line, it's up to us to rein them in. At the moment, the European Union is going through a phase of austerity measures that is upsetting and enraging people. But don't forget that 50% of the funds spent on government social welfare programs worldwide flow within the EU. In other words, times are tougher than they used to be, but we're still the best neighborhood, the best community in the world. We shouldn't underrate what we have just because we want to have it even better. On the world map, we're located to the west of Turkey, Syria, and Israel, and north of Egypt, Libya, and the other countries of North Africa. Why do we say we're having a humanitarian crisis? What should they say? All those people whom I've just listed. They have wars, blood is flowing there. A human life is worth much less there than here in Greece. Before we say anything at all about the current situation, we simply have to see that Greek democracy is one of the best in the world today. Just outside of Athens lies the historic port of Piraeus. Here in the Saronic Gulf, tankers and container ships lie on the roads, and passenger ships and ferries dock. With 19 million passengers passing through annually, Piraeus is Europe's largest passenger port. Piraeus has always been a bridgehead to the islands and was once the starting point for countless immigrants on their journey overseas. It is also an El Dorado for sailors and yacht owners. Water sports, and sailing in particular, hold a special place in the Greek psyche. Those who can afford it have a slip in one of the yacht harbors that was spruced up for the 2004 Olympics, such as here in Zias Marina. The economic crisis has not forced the seriously rich to downsize their vessels, but they are now under a stricter guard. Here in one of the 3 yacht marinas in Piraeus, Sofia Bekatourou was waiting for the right wind. She's a gold medal-winning Olympian and Greece's most celebrated sailor. She was here to try out her new boat. The craft is a very special innovation, almost more surfboard than jollyboat, a bespoke creation. Together with her trainer, she began to ready the racing boat for its trial run. But the hefty breeze, which she had so longed for on the one hand, was looking like it was going to thwart her plans altogether.
While we were getting ready, the wind really whipped up, which means that for this ship, conditions are now not good. I'm now forced to switch vessels. This boat can't go into the water with a wind force of 7. Up to a wind speed of 20 miles per hour, you can train with it. But with more wind than that, it's too dangerous.
So it was back to the drawing board. The new boat was taken apart and stowed away again. Stuff happens. Professional sailors know what risks are acceptable and when it's better to pack it in. This approach has seen Sofia successfully through 2 Olympic Games. In 2004, she even won gold. Her victory filled the whole of Greece with pride and strengthened her emotional bond to the sea even more.
I've never been afraid of the sea per se, although there have of course been situations in which we were in danger in all these years. I've been involved with the sea for 28 years now. You must always respect it. You have to think clearly, not take any unnecessary risks. And you always need to have a plan B. In Australia, we once encountered sharks. It was around the time of the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. And there we were training, and a whole school of sharks just swam by. I was afraid then, but of the sharks, not of the ocean. Together with some female colleagues, I experienced a situation where the wind speed exceeded 40 miles. We were shipwrecked, including the sails, and we had to leave our equipment behind and bring ourselves to safety.
Zofia had decided to switch for the day to a more wind-worthy class of boat and started getting the backup vessel ready. In dealing with the sea and the weather, she relies on the ancient body of Greek seamen's tenets known as naftosini. It applies to all areas of seafaring and is rooted in the experience of the Attican naval fleet, in sailors' lore from Ulysses to the Argonauts.
For me, naftosini is hard to explain. It includes all the measures that must be taken to safely sail the seas. That starts with knowing what wind conditions and currents you can expect to encounter at sea. That's much easier nowadays with technology and the internet.
But that's certainly not the end of it. According to Zofia, anyone who sets out to sea in a boat must always be aware of all the risks and always be prepared for the worst-case scenario. Only then is the sailor acting responsibly, according to the naftosini fundamentals. It's no big deal when Zofia capsizes in training. That happens up to 15 times a session. She knows that and comes prepared. Sailing without capsizing wouldn't be her style. As the saying goes, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
The sea is my life. I can't imagine ever living far from the ocean. I realized that at an early age, when I went to the beach. When I went sailing for the first time at the age of 8, I literally forgot to turn back. I still feel the same today at the age of 37. It would be marvelous if I could just spend the whole day out at sea. Sometimes I do manage to, which makes me very happy. That's also how I feel when I take my kids out and I can show them all the joys that the sea bestows when you respect it. Wonderful situations just arise naturally, and they teach the children lessons for life, simply through practical experience.
Zofia Pecotoru has twice been named World Sailor of the Year. These waters that Zofia navigated on the day of our visit was also the site 2,500 years ago of the greatest naval battle of all time. The numerically far superior Persian navy had attacked, aiming to take Athens. Then came the cryptic word from Delphi to trust in wooden walls. The Athenians got the message. They first brought their women and children to safety in Salamis, then built a wall of sorts of their nimble wooden ships. They thus staged a counterattack, sinking a large portion of the Persian fleet. The Athenians simply had superior knowledge of the sea and of their waters in particular. And they also had the Naftosini, their special nautical tradition, a practical philosophy combining respect and reverence for and a deep love of the sea.